Hello and welcome back to our continuing series of online events for the 2020 Notre Dame Shakespeare Festival. We can't be with you in our theaters. We know that will resume soon, next year at the latest, certainly. But in the meantime, we can share with you a variety of talents and classes and performances from our incredible pool of artists, instructors, and production staff. Tonight is no exception. There's been a lot of interest in intimacy direction, and Sarah Scanlon is the perfect person to bring it to NDSF audiences, who will remember her very fondly from our 2016 production of The Tempest, in which she was a very literal Ariel, suspended on a 24-inch steel bar, a trapeze, 15 feet in the air and cabled at 65 feet. It was an incredible performance. She also designed the prosthetic hands for Caliban in that production, played the oboe up there, as well as acted and sang on a trapeze. She's a remarkable artist, and lately she's also developed a portion of her career into intimacy direction in the theater and intimacy coordination when it's in television and film, including a particularly notable show, which is a favorite of mine, Fargo, which films in Chicago, so that's exciting. I think you're really going to get a lot out of this. I know there's a lot of attention on intimacy direction, and so without any further ado, please enjoy this workshop from Sarah Scanlon on intimacy direction.
The meeting asked if I consented to being recorded. That's a perfect introduction. I love it. Hey, y'all. My name is Sarah Scanlon. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an intimacy director and actor in Chicago. This is a very odd format. I said that a second ago before we started recording, but especially if you're talking about intimacy, so I can talk right to the camera and it looks like I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at your faces on the screen. So excuse my looking around and seeing all of your lovely faces. I would love to just go around real quick, and even though I can read your names, I would just love to hear your names and your pronouns and what you do in the theater. Why are you in theater? What do you do in theater? So I will start to my upper left, which is Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Jones. I use she, her pronouns. I have a Master of Fine Arts in Shakespeare and Performance from Mary Baldwin University. I do a little of everything, mostly acting, but I've done some directing, mostly TYAs, dramaturgy, education, you name it, I've probably dabbled in it. So that's me.
Awesome. I'm going to go around. Jordan.
Hi, my name is Jordan Taylor. I use she, her pronouns. I mostly do acting, but I've been dabbling in playwriting, and I'm also an aspiring intimacy director / coordinator.
Awesome. Kevin?
I'm Kevin Halger. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm primarily an actor.
James?
Hi, I'm James Cullinan. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm also primarily an actor.
Patrick?
I am, excuse me, my name is Patrick. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a director, producer, administrator for theater.
Awesome. And Cheyenne?
My name is Cheyenne Harrison, she, her pronouns, and I primarily do acting, but I like to do a little bit of everything.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're here to do today is talk about what an intimacy director is, what we do, why we have us. And so I'd first love to know if anyone is familiar with intimacy directing. I heard that one person already is interested in the career path, but does anyone know what an intimacy director is? In your own words, I'd love to hear if you do or don't. You can do like a little hand raise so we all know. Yeah, go ahead. Allison.
So my familiarity with it is someone who facilitates safe spaces for actors and other theater practitioners as they navigate intimate moments of any degree in production and rehearsal.
Awesome. I love that. Yes, safe spaces. I like saying brave spaces. Kevin, you were going to say something?
I was, but Allison said it better. So I'm gonna leave it with that.
That's excellent. No, so that's great. So intimacy directing is it's a threefold job. Okay, so the first one is basically what you exactly just said, which is an actor advocate, right? So we're making sure that actors have agencies over their bodies and how the stories that are being told on stage, how they interact with those stories on stage and how they interact with each other when telling those stories on stage. And we're talking about stories of that includes simulated sex or any kind of physical intimacy or nudity or simulated violence, in relationship to also like, fight directors also. We work hand in hand often with fight directors. The second piece of the job is someone who comes in and helps the entire production team develop a language on understanding on like anti-harassment, for lack of a better term. So how to make the space as safe as possible, and creating structure, protocols, and procedures when working with these scenes to make sure that everyone is protected when they're working, right? So we're talking about the stage manager, we're talking about the backstage crew. All of those people are involved when we're talking about how to deal with these scenes of simulated sex or intimacy on stage. And the last one is I'm a movement professional, a movement expert. So I actually choreograph, again, like a fight director, these scenes so that they are safe and that they are repeatable and that they tell the same story every single night, and that the people involved in the stories are consenting to what they are doing every night, and that they are both on the same page about the story that they are telling. That's called context, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So it's three pieces. And I like to sort of compare it to fight directing because that's an older, more, established practice. And that's, like now when you say, oh, they fight, you'd never just throw actors into a sword fight. I mean, you wouldn't, like, please don't. But, so now they kiss is that same thing. Why would we throw actors into a scene like that when we can bring in an intimacy director, intimacy choreographer to choreograph that for us? Yeah? Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Long-winded on what we do. Has anyone ever worked with an intimacy director before? Yes? I'm seeing some yeses and nos. Kevin, you have. What was the context of that, working with an intimacy director?
We put on Spring Awakening, which of course is the ending of Act 1, the sex scene, as well as the switch scene. And our intimacy director was also a fight choreographer, so she worked with us on all of it, on the violence and the sexual scenes.
Yeah, that's great. And it often is the same person, but it is two pretty separate jobs, pretty different jobs. So you always want to make sure that when you're talking to the producers, that you know who your intimacy director is and that they are trained, and that they are trained in both if they are doing both, right? So I would like to go into, I'm getting my notes. So the pillars of intimacy directing that were developed by the founder of this movement as I prescribe to it. Her name is Tonia Sina. She is an intimacy director in Chicago now. She's been all over the place, but she founded an organization called Intimacy Directors International, along with Alicia Rodas and Siobhan Richardson, who the two of them are fight people, fight choreographers and stunt people. So they developed this structure for how an intimacy director works. And there are 5 things called the 5 pillars that an intimacy director does when working on scenes of simulated sex or intimacy on stage. Okay, so those 5 pillars are context. That's the first pillar. So context is, what story are we telling? very simply, what story are we telling? Before anything else can be considered, before any choreography, before any other conversations can happen, everyone needs to understand and be aware of how the intimacy affects the story. Why is it in there, right? And what kind of story are we telling? The next pillar is consent. And we'll get more into that in just a moment. But consent is, has to be established between the actors telling the story. So something very important that I always like to say is that permission may be given by a director or the script, but consent can only be given by the people who are doing the movement, are in the scene together. Yeah, does that make sense? So someone can come and say, okay, go hug him, but only you can consent to that with the person that they've asked you to hug. Okay. Next pillar, communication. So communication, we help with communication, make sure that it's opened, that it's continuous between actors, the director, the stage manager, anyone on the production team if necessary. We're discussing the scene, we're understanding the choreography, and we're talking continuously about, again, are we telling the right story? How are we feeling about this? Are we still enthusiastically consenting to this story? We also help, again, sort of with protocols on, what is the timeline of if we're dealing with nudity, what is the timeline of how we're going to accomplish that? So we help with that kind of communication as well. Next pillar is choreography. So that is the actual intimacy that is going to be choreographed that comes off the page. So they kiss, right? So that would be the choreography. Again, the reason we choreograph something is so that it can be safe and repeatable and is telling the right story. Yeah. And then it's the job of the stage manager. So any of y'all who are, stage managers or producers, it's the job of the stage manager to write it down. And then once the intimacy director is, out of the picture, once the scene, once the show opens, it's the stage manager's job to, watch that choreography every night, just as they would, a sword fight or a brawl, and check in with actors if they see that anything has changed. So that's, again, sort of part of that communication, right? Making sure that everything is still always the same every time. And then the last pillar is closure. So we do a closure practice, IDI, and I'm now part of an organization called IDC, which is Intimacy Directors and Choreographers, which is, and Coordinators, excuse me, which is more inclusive of also coordinating, which is the film and TV side of things. Yeah, it's developed by a lot of the same people who are with IDI. But closure is that we suggest that at the end of a rehearsal, especially if you're doing a scene of intimacy, that the actors have a closing moment, right? To sort of, we call it, tagging in. Some people call it tapping in and tapping out. I call it tagging in, tagging out. Just a moment to kind of acknowledge that they are coming out of the scene, that they are no longer actors, and that they are now themselves. Yeah, it's a really good practice to start a rehearsal. It's a really good practice to end a rehearsal. And it really helps with what I like to call emotional hygiene. So especially when we're doing scenes of, heightened, especially if we're doing scenes with simulated sexual violence in them, it can be very difficult for both parties coming into that scene. There's, a lot to work through. So it's really important that we, tag in and tag out. So we can't tag in and tag out together right now, but I'd love to do like an electronic version. So let's all put our hands up like this. And we're just going to take a nice deep breath together. And if we were in person, we would do like a high 10. Yeah, so that we're making eye contact, doing a high 10, and we're hearing, we're seeing, and we're feeling, connecting with each other. But since we are electronic, we can just do little spirit fingers, get that energy out. Yeah, it is. It's really, it's a way of getting energy out, getting energy, through moving energy and sort of coming back to center. So I would suggest that you, play with this idea of closure, even if you're not doing scenes of intimacy. It's just really nice to, you're playing Lady M or Mr. M. That's some heavy stuff, right? Like, you want to be able to go home at the end of the day, right? And one of the things an intimacy director can help you do is to separate yourself from the character, because what we're doing is storytelling. It isn't real. It's simulated, right? And so we always want to make sure that we are reminding ourselves, reminding our bodies that this is not real. So unlike sword fighting, where we're not actually stabbing someone, we might actually be kissing someone, and our bodies will have reactions to that. And there's no shame in that, but we want to make sure that we can then walk away and go home to whomever we're going home to, or, just again, like separating, being really professional and making sure that we continue to tell the story and we don't get our own stuff mixed up with the other stuff. Yeah, does that make sense? So an intimacy director will do all of those things and more for you in the rehearsal room. Any questions so far? I see a chat. Yes, we can take a break and talk about where I was trained and how. Thank you, Grant. So I was trained, I have an MFA in acting from the American Repertory Theater, Moscow Art Theater School at Harvard University. Some version of that, some version of those letters and names. And I have a BA in theater from Western Michigan University. A lot of my movement training has come from circus arts, being a circus artist, an aerial performer, and I've done mask work with the Del Arte School of Physical Theater in California. And so my intimacy directing specifically, I trained with IDI under Tony Asina, Alicia Rhodes, and Claire Warden, who's another founding member of that organization. And now with IDC, they're also doing a training program that actually is a little bit more not planned out, but is very clear on the steps in which you take. But a lot of my training was, a lot of workshopping, a lot of mentoring, a lot of shadowing, apprenticing. And that's really, kind of the final step in all of this is really, kind of getting behind the wheel of the airplane and trying it out, because you can talk about it all day, but until you try it out, right? So that's a part of it is training in the room as an assistant. So if people want to get into this work, there are some other things that intimacy directors, at least again under IDC, need to be trained on. So mental health first aid. Yeah, I'm not a therapist, but I am often dealing with scenes that can be very sensitive, and it's good to have tools to be able to give people tools to manage those things in the room, right? So we can have open conversations about those things, and I can provide resources, especially if we're doing things kind of relating to trauma or, simulated violence. It's really good to have some mental health first aid training. Get thee into an implicit bias training class. Yeah, because we're dealing with a lot of different stories. We're dealing with a lot of different cultures. We're dealing with a lot of different, intimacy in different cultures, tons of different kinds of intimacy. Platonic intimacy in one culture is going to be very different than platonic intimacy in another culture. And so we want to make sure that we know the kind of language that we're using, and, that we can, kind of challenge our own biases and expand our thinking. Yeah, so that's really important. Not especially now, but especially now. Yeah.
I knew that we really did want to hear the story of your training, but indeed that was one of the sort of threads that got bounced around was where an artist can go now. I know that Alicia and Tony and Claire, I think, are doing some independent training, or at least some.
So IDC, we're doing a lot of small workshops online right now, which again is such a weird. It really is so weird, right? Like let's just be honest. It's very, very hard to train intimacy in this way, because The first thing we do, or the first thing, I do in a workshop, is we work on eye contact, because eye contact is extremely intimate. And a lot of us don't practice eye contact because we're here all the time, right? And now we're here all the time. So one of the things that I'm personally working on in, furthering my education in intimacy is like, what does intimacy look like after COVID? Like, what does this industry look like? Coming out of COVID, it's like, we're going to be on the front lines of teaching people how to interact with each other in intimate ways again. Simulated and whatnot. So even just, if I imagine some of the exercises we do that have to do with, numbers, scales of intensity in, hug intensities or types of eye contact, I get choked up about it because it's like, oh my God, I can't wait to hold someone's hand again. And so it's like, how is that going to inform the training? How is that going to inform the stories that we're going to tell, right? So I'm about to work on a very short, small film here in Chicago. We're not filming until at least the end of July, but it is about distancing, and it is about like, how do you deal with intimacy? How are you at a party and you have a crush on someone, and how do you tell them with being 6 feet away? So we're going to be playing with that. And so back to the,
I recommend sonnets.
Sonnets, that's right. So, but that's right. Just from 6 feet away, yelling the sonnet through your mask. But so that's part of the right now. The IDC is doing some online training, like 90-minute workshops, which again, taking 2, 4, 10 of those is not going to make you an intimacy director, but it will give you a really good idea of what the training is like, and what you'll be experiencing in the training. And it is training, and a lot of the hours that you need to accrue with IDC, those workshops will help go towards that.
Nice.
And they're for everyone. There's ones that have to do with stage managers. There's ones that deal just with directors. There's ones that deal with producers. There's ones that deal with education, because academia is a very different world than professional theater. There's a different world than film. There's a different world to, not-for-profit storefront theater in Chicago. So there's a lot of different areas of expertise that you can go into. And so, taking some of these workshops would be really a great place to go if you are interested.
Thank you. I did not mean to derail. I
no, absolutely.
Getting in there, and so I wanted to interject it.
And if you want to work in a university, if you want to work in a university setting, you want to get trained in Title IX, in what Title IX is and how Title IX works. And, so there's a lot of different things to know. When you're dealing with the film world, you're dealing with more lawyers. You're dealing with studio executives, right? And so there's just a lot of different paths, and we're all sort of forging them together as the industry grows and changes, and more opportunities for training with other companies come up. And IDC is not the only company training actors and training intimacy directors, but so that's just a little bit of, yeah. Does that answer the question?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to step out a little bit, and then I get to hand you back to, as James Lipson was wont to say, here you go back to your students.
Oh, excellent. So one of the biggest things that I would love for y'all to walk away with from this class is some consent language and how to negotiate boundaries, because you won't always be able to have an intimacy director in your places of rehearsal or in your classrooms. I like to tell people that you are your best advocate. And if you are auditioning for a play and you read a scene in that play that you think requires an intimacy director, you are allowed to ask for one. Yeah. You can say to the director, you can say to the producer, hey, is there an intimacy director hired for this production? And if they say, what's an intimacy director? You can tell them what an intimacy director does. Yeah. And something I like to make sure people know is, like, I'm not the touch police. Yeah, I am not the harassment overseer of the rehearsal room. I am giving you language, but I am there to make the touch that you do and to make the stories you tell even more exciting. And boundaries are a gift. Yeah. So knowing each other's boundaries then frees you to make even more bold choices than you would have, without, fear of, oh, I'm going to hurt someone or I'm going to offend someone. Yeah. So boundaries are a gift. So having some of this language is really, if you walk away with nothing else, I want you to know that you can ask for an intimacy director if you want one, if you need one, if you want that advocate in the room, and a little bit of consent language. So I'd love to do a little bit of participation here and see if we can talk about what the pieces of consent are. What has to be in place for there to actually be consent? Does that make sense? So the definition of consent is like 2 words, but there's a whole lot of things that make up consent. Can anyone tell me like what they think consent means? What does that mean to you? Yeah, Jordan.
Freely given, not coerced in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's actually the first point of consent. I love that. Anything else? I'm going to teach you an acronym. It's from Planned Parenthood. We use it from Planned Parenthood. The acronym is FRIES. And Jordan totally nailed the first letter. Consent is freely given. Yeah? So you cannot coerce someone. You cannot ask them until they say yes. It has to be freely given. Yeah? Okay, so R. What could R stand for? Consent is... Yeah.
Reciprocal?
Reciprocal, that is true. That is not the R I'm looking at. That is not the R I'm looking for, but it is true. Revocable or reversible. So consent is reversible. Yeah. Just because you say yes to something one day does not mean that you have to say yes to it the next day. And that's why we learn consent language. That's why we learn language about talking about our boundaries, so that we can make sure that we have consent every time we do something. And it's not a long conversation, I promise. Cool. And the other thing is with revocable or reversible, it's not my business and it's not your business as your scene partner to ask why, right? I can't ask you why your boundaries are your boundaries. They just are. Yeah. So we have to breathe and pivot. That's what Alicia says. We breathe and pivot if we have to change something. All right, FRI. What would the I stand for? Consent is informed. We know what's going to happen before it happens. So the example I like to give is we're sitting in a circle, introducing ourselves. Someone says, oh, I have no boundaries. Don't worry about me, I have no boundaries, I'll do anything. Oh, really? I bet I can find your boundaries. Okay, try me. Great, can I come over there and kick you in the shin really hard? No. Oh, found your boundary. Right? So they were informed about what kind of movement I was going to do, because tap your shin with my toe is different than kick your shin really hard. Yeah? So you cannot consent to something unless it is informed. Okay? FRIE. What does the E stand for? I said it way earlier in the talk. Kind of breezed through it though. I think I did. I'll have to rewind the tape. It's enthusiastic. Consent is enthusiastic. Yeah? So the absence of a yes is no. Yeah? So we'll often be in the rehearsal room and someone will say, sure, yeah. Is that a yes? I need to hear yes, right? Maybe, that's no. I guess so is no, right? So if you do not have an enthusiastic yes to what is being asked of you, it is no. Yeah? And we'll learn a little bit of language around negotiating that no in just a minute. Okay. And the last is S, right? S, yeah. It's specific. So it kind of goes along with informed a little bit, but it's specific. So especially when we're talking about choreography, left hand on her right shoulder, here's the type of touch we're going to do, how hard are you going to squeeze, that sort of thing. So it's very specific. So informed and specific are sort of our buddies there, yeah? So all of those things have to be true in order for consent to be in the room, right? And if any of those are not true, if something is not revocable, then you can't give consent, right? If someone is asking you to do something that is not specific, you can't give consent. Yeah. And so when we're talking about, especially when we're talking about like power structures, especially in like a teacher-student relationship, you know, if you're in an academic situation with, like academic theater where it's being graded, there's all sorts of worms, right? There's all sorts of issues with, power dynamics, and how is consent, how do you broker consent within power dynamics? And that's one of the things that an intimacy director also, so there's a ladder, right? The hierarchy of power, right? So there's like the actor, and then there's the director, or there's the teacher. And so an intimacy director is there to flatten that ladder so that we're all on the same level, same wavelength, all telling the same story and have the same vocabulary to work with. So I would like to give you some of that vocabulary. So I will say now, this is much different than when we are in person, because in person we do this with touch, but not in person, we are going to do this a little bit differently. So the name of the game is this. So we're going to keep our cameras on. What you're going to do is I'll ask, so we'll use Allison as an example. So I'll have Allison, you're going to ask somebody if they will do something or show something. So for example, Allison, will you show me the socks you're wearing? So you can say yes, or you can say no. Those are the two things. Okay. So let's the rule, I've already not told you the rules. So the rules is, let's stay out of taking a shirt off. Let's stay out. Let's keep this, anything that you'd keep covered on an American beach, let's keep covered in this exercise. Yeah. So let me give you some examples. So may I see your sock? Will you tell me what you had for breakfast? Very, very arbitrary, right? So I just want you to ask a fellow person, and you'll go around. If you get a yes, go ahead and do the thing. If you get a no, that's the end of the discussion. And the person who said no will then ask someone else. Does that make sense? Yes? Enthusiastic yes? Great. So Cheyenne, why don't you start?
Jordan, what is your favorite color? Will you answer what's your favorite color?
Yes. My favorite color is green. And now it's my turn.
Mm-hmm.
Allison, would it work for you if you could stand up in the camera?
Yes. Let's see. James, can I see your left palm?
Yes. Kevin, will you shave all your hair off right now at this moment?
No. Patrick, will you describe to me the picture that's hanging on the wall behind you?
Yes, that is the library at Notre Dame. Jordan, will you raise your right hand?
No. James, would it work for you if you would show your left elbow?
Yes. Cheyenne, can I see your socks?
Yes, but I'm not wearing any.
Me neither.
Sarah, is that a real plant in the back?
No. Cool, I'll stop there. So, what did it feel like to get a no? We didn't get a lot of no's. Y'all were very, very giving with each other. But I did see some reactions when people got no's. What were those reactions? What was it like to hear someone get a no or to get a no? Don't all talk at once.
It like changed the vibe and in a powerful way. And I don't even want to like give it a positive or negative judgment, but it definitely affects everything around.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What else? So I'd love to point out that this game has 0 stakes, right? 0. And we still did feel a change in energy when someone said no, right? With 0 stakes, yeah? When we're all safely in our homes. So can you imagine how hard it might be to say no in a rehearsal room when the script says they do something? You're in front of everyone in the room, in front of the cast, in front of the director who is in a position of power is asking you to do something. There's more stakes involved, right? So one of the things that intimacy directors will do in the room will help take some of that emotional attachment out of the word no. Because again, no is just an indication of a boundary, right? So now I would like to give you another piece of vocabulary that you can use. And we're going to do this game, we're going to do another round. So now you can say yes, you can say no, or you can say no, but. Okay, so we all learn yes and in our theater schools. We all have to be very good yes-anders. Never say no to anything, always continue the conversation. But that doesn't take into account your own boundaries and your own comfortability with where that conversation is going. So no but is an opportunity to assert a boundary, but to continue the conversation. Does that make sense? So for example, Allison, go ahead and ask me a question.
Sarah, can you pull your hair up?
No, but I can tuck it behind my ear. Okay, so that's how that works. So you can still say yes, you can say no, but you could also say no, but. And try to be arbitrary, right? You might say yes to everything. You might have an actual full body, enthusiastically consenting yes to anything that anyone asks in this room. But see what happens, see how it feels to say no to something or to say no, but. Yeah, and we'll go around a couple times. So Patrick, why don't you start us off?
Kevin, will you brush your hair back?
No. Jordan, will you brush your hair back?
No, but I will tuck it behind my ears. James, would it work for you to brush your teeth right now?
No. No. Allison, will you pick your nose right now?
No. Cheyenne, will you take your hat off?
No, but I'll take my glasses off for a little bit. Kevin, will you tell me what is in that blue trunk?
Yes, those are spare bed linens in there. Allison, will you tell me where you got your headset?
Yes, my boyfriend bought it from, I think, Amazon. Patrick, can you adjust your camera down?
Yes. James, will you sit in the chair in your background?
No, but I can sit right here. Jordan, will you stand up right now?
No, but I will raise the seat down. So now all you get is my neck and head. Allison, would it work for you if you would put your hair in a bun?
Yes. Might take a second, though. There's a lot of it. In the meantime, Kevin, will you tell me what's in your closet?
No, but I will give you a little peek.
Great. Let's stop there. Yeah, cool. So how did that feel? What was that like? Yeah, Jordan.
Oh, yes. For me, I think because of the conditioning of yes and how embedded that is in the theatrical world, no always feels like practice, like a muscle being worked out. But it feels, so I feel like the more no is said or no but is said, it feels a bit better each time. So for me, saying no this time around, it was still jerking in some way, but I think it was better than the last time. And each time I think it gets more, just a bit easier to say no when you want to say no.
Yeah. Yeah, Allison.
I think also this time around, having the option to include no but and offer an alternative made it, even when I said just a straight up no, made it more comfortable that it was like either I can give a hard no or I can say no and offer an alternative, that it's like, no, I don't like that choice, but here's an option instead.
Yeah. Anything else about that? Those are great. Those are great points. Yeah. James.
I thought it was really interesting the way you pointed out the yes and how it, I think it made us all think like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing all the time, even when just someone asks us to do something. But I really like the no but because I think it provides an opportunity. If like a director says, can you do this? You have a different perspective. You're like, I can't, but I can do this other thing, which would provide the same effect. Kind of like how I asked Jordan to stand up and she's like, no, but I can move the camera and we can get a similar result without me doing the thing that I don't want to do, which I thought was cool. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's like all of those answers are, I mean, no right answers, no wrong answers, but those are absolutely right answers. Yes, right? What page are we on? What story are we telling? And there are so many ways to tell a story, right? I just choreographed a play where there were like 5 different hand kisses and they all had to tell different stories, right? And so what are the ways that someone can kiss someone else's hand? You know, what are the pieces of that? And so that's something that we are negotiating, right? What's the most interesting way that we can tell this story? And sometimes when we have our first, a friend of mine likes to say, in the bad ideas first pile, right? So our first hit of something might not be the best idea, or the thing that we might, go to first, or even like the playwright's stage directions. We have to say, okay, why did the playwright think this action was what this moment needed, right? And how can we tell that? And is that the most interesting way to tell it? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it totally is. And sometimes it's like, well, the actors aren't going to do that. That's not in their, not within their boundaries. So how do we tell exactly what, James, you just said? How do we tell the same story in the container of what the actors are okay with doing? Yeah, that's huge. And another thing that you can walk away with, that please walk away with when you walk away from this room. Just because you audition for a play that has certain actions in it does not mean that you consent to doing those actions. Yeah, I'll say it again. Auditioning for something does not mean you consent to do something. Yeah, so asking if there's an intimacy director involved is a great way to make sure that your boundaries are going to be managed well in that situation, or knowing how to negotiate with consent in this very easy way. Yeah. So again, a director can say, okay, well, just, oh, here's the kissing scene. Okay, well, good. Okay, do it. Just do it now. It's like, that's not informed. That's not specific. And you can't give consent. Only the people doing the action can give consent. So if you have a director that isn't working with an intimacy director, or even if you do, the actors checking in with each other, that's so empowering, right? And it just takes a second. If you have an impulse, so one of my jobs is a physicality expert, right? So if I see an actor go for an impulse of, oh, you know what? I just saw you wanted to touch her shoulder. Is that accurate? Yeah, I did. Okay, great. Is that okay? Like, let's talk about that. Let's do it, right? And so an intimacy director also is there to work with your impulses. Yeah, we're not puppeting. You're not our puppet, right? We will give you as specific as movement as you need or as we need to tell the story, but we are an outside eye to make sure that your impulses are also being, uplifted and managed in that way. Yeah. So does that make sense? That you don't consent just because you audition? Yeah. And also, like, do make sure you know what you're in for, right? So if you're gonna audition for Spring's Awakening, like, make sure you understand the subject matter, and also know what your boundaries are, so that you can discuss, so that you're really clear about what story is being told. And okay, here's how I can tell the story. Here's how I can show up to tell this story. If there's an intimacy director, will help manage that even further, right? Questions about that? No? Yes, Jordan.
Would you say, as far as auditioning goes, when whatever theater is holding auditions for this show with intimacy within it, and they have a form for consent, to give consent to whatever actions are in the play, do you still think that you can stand by, well, yes, I gave consent on this form, but now that we're here, things have changed?
Yeah, so
it's like,
absolutely. So if it's on an audition form, that's awesome. It's informing you of their intent, right? That said, it is not specific. So are you okay with nudity? In what context, right? What kind of nudity? How much? How is it going to be handled? Why? Right? So, like, the other thing that I always say is, so we're simulating all of this, right? So even if we are actually kissing someone, we are actually kissing someone, but all, the simulated sex is not real. And anything that we can put on stage, the audience is way more imaginative than we can put on stage. Let's put it that way, right? So we are there to give the audience the tools to tell their own story, but there's nothing that we can do on stage that an audience's brain wouldn't do better. Yeah. So we have to say, why nudity? Why? What's, you know, and so on an audition form, you can say, I would need to have a conversation about what type of nudity this is before giving consent. Right. And that's, you know, that's the no, but, you know, or that's the yes, and, you know, that's the yes, I'll discuss this, or yes, director and producer, be ready to have a conversation about consent. Because again, consent is revocable, because you can absolutely say, yes, I'm comfortable with nudity on an audition form. And then you get into the room and the first day the director's like, all right, we're doing hair, everyone get naked. It's like, oh, no, nope. I didn't sign up for that. Thank you very much, you know? And some people do sign up for that, and that's fine, but I didn't. and no one should, because it wasn't informed, you know? So that's a great question. But remembering that phrase, you know, is it revocable? If someone says it's not, then you can't actually give consent. That doesn't matter if it's not revocable.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yeah, Kevin.
So something that I started to think about when we were talking about other ways to tell a story apart from how they're explicitly told in stage directions is something like where you might expect someone to have a certain comfortability, or they express comfortability with something, but let's say they carry like a physical trauma in a very specific place in their body that you wouldn't even think of. Have you ever had to, that's come up in conversation before, but I don't think I've ever seen it handled, and I was wondering if you've ever had to work around something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, you know, I will always ask, you know, as part of conversations that I have with people, especially for dealing with TV and film, which is so fast, right? It's a totally different world because it is just so fast. So my conversations are pretty different with theater, with film and TV, but same with theater. I always talk to the actors, asking them if they know of anywhere on their bodies that they know like is a red light, no go. Do not even ask if this can be involved in the choreography. No way. So like I had someone who did not want the back of their neck touched. We're like, I am a green light everywhere. You can do whatever you want, but do not touch the back of my neck. That's my red light. Yeah. And so I do, you know, green, yellow, red is kind of nice. So like, you know, green is like, yeah, you know, we'll talk about it, but once we talk about it, you don't have to ask again. Yellow is, I'm comfortable with a conversation. You know, red is no go, never, no go. So if we find a red light when we're working, you know, hopefully we are working in a mindful enough way that we're not just jumping into trying something without having a conversation. And that, you know, again, one of my jobs as you know, a reader of body language is if someone is doing, if I start to see any sort of trauma response. So if I start to see someone getting flushed, someone change their breathing rate. And this is, when we do choreography, we don't do it in, like, we're not acting it yet. We're literally doing like, step this way, touch this way, put your hand here. So it's very, very like dry, you know, we're very, you know, unmotivated in an acting way. So if just that simple touch starts to evoke some sort of reaction, and if we've set up a room in a way that someone is comfortable and someone has the tools to say, oops, stop, right? Just stop. Great, we stop. We don't have to explain why. We just say, you know what? That piece of choreography or that, you know, touching you right there isn't going to work for me, but can we try here, right? So hopefully we've set up the conversation well enough so that if I see that start to happen, or if that does happen, we can pull out, we can tag out, we can have a conversation about it, and we can move forward. And that's one of the reasons, like, a stage manager watches the choreography every night and makes sure that it's you know, the same every night, because everyone has consented to that choreography. So some night if it changes, that means that we're doing something without consent if it changed. So what a stage manager would do in that situation is they'd take the actors, they talk to them separately, right? Because we don't want to deal with power structures, we don't deal with any of that. So the stage manager would say, hey, you know what? I noticed that the choreography, like that their hand went a little bit lower on your back than it usually does. Did you talk about that? Or, you know, was that okay? And if they say, oh yeah, totally. You know what? We had a conversation backstage right after it happened. All good, no worries. Or the person can feel free to say, you know what? They've been getting a little grabby, or they've been getting a little handsy, or they've changed the choreography. And then the stage manager can go to those actors during the intimacy call. So just like you have a fight call, you have an intimacy call before a show. You know, you run, again, you know, just like one time slow, one time at speed, the intimacy, moments of intimacy. Before the show starts. So you can check in, get consent, make sure you're all good. If you're not healthy, if you're sick, rework the kiss, figure out what you're going to do instead of the kiss, call your intimacy director. What do we do? We're sick, right? But, you know, in that moment, the stage manager in the intimacy call can say, hey, you know what? I was looking at the choreography. It seems to have deviated just a little bit. So there's no blame, there's no shame, there's none of that. Just, it's the, you know, I always say, blame the choreographer, right? Blame me. You say, you know, the choreography was just a little different, was a little off. I want to make sure that we're still telling the right story, and that we're still consenting to tell the right story with each other, right? And then if it continuously happens, then we have a different conversation. Then we have to bring the producer in, but usually it's, you know, so that was a really long way to answer that question, Kevin, but does that make sense? So we really, you know, we really want to kind of set up a room where it's okay to have the stop and the red light conversation, but that's always a conversation. And when choreographing, me personally, I always give people choices. So I'll always have a couple of different ideas on how the story could be told. And there's sort of like the more risky one and the one that's maybe a little tamer or a little safer feeling. And when someone knows that they have an out, they often will choose the one that's a little more risky, because they know that there's another way to tell the story, and they know that saying no to something isn't the end of the conversation. Does that make sense? So we always want to make sure that we're giving options, that we're giving, you know, suggestions based on the actor's impulses as well. Yeah, those are great questions. What else? Yeah, Allison.
So one of the things that, you know, has been kind of percolating in my brain is, you know, obviously in an ideal world, every production everywhere would have an intimacy director in the room. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be a dream? But for, you know, those of us who are working in productions that don't necessarily have an intimacy director, beyond, you know, the consent language that we've already discussed, the yes, no, no, but, mm-hmm. I'm just curious if you have advice for practitioners as they navigate productions in those scenarios until the intimacy director is perhaps as, you know, common as the fight director.
Yeah. So what I'd say to that is think about that in programming, right? So in season selection, the long term, think about season selection. And if you're going to do Spring Awakening, don't do it if you don't have an intimacy director, right? If you have already chosen a show, and what do we do now that we've chosen this, or we didn't realize that this moment maybe needed an intimacy director? So having this language, yes. Having conversations about consent in the room. So again, like the best thing you can do, take implicit bias training, learn how to speak to people in a room about consent language, about preconceived notions, and creating a really clean space to be able to have open communication. And then if you get in over your head, call one of us, like legit, like find an intimacy director who is working in the industry, who is trained, and call us or email us, because we would, we can't come to the rescue, and we're not, we're not knights in shining armor, but we would much rather get on the phone with a production for 30 minutes to talk through an issue than to have someone, accidentally or purposely be abused in a situation, right? So the long answer, make sure you don't do a show without, that you need one in. Short answer is make sure that you are comfortable with this language. Make sure you're comfortable using anatomical terms for what you are doing, right? So we're not using slang about people's bodies in the room. We're not making assumptions about bodies in the room. We have to be able to have these conversations without giggling, right? And so again, normalizing these conversations, normalizing consent language is huge, because then everyone in the room knows, oh, okay, I can stop and I can have a conversation about this. The other thing I would say is, for moments of intimacy, is the rule is you never rehearse them alone. You always have a third party present, whether that's the stage manager, where that's the assistant director, where that's even another person in the cast. Not ideal, but another person on the production team, because if, especially in academic situations, you're living together, you're all living in the dorm, you're all doing everything together, and then you're practicing your scene from Romeo and Juliet, you're actually just kissing in the hallway. Right. So if you're with another person, then you are rehearsing, then there is someone watching outside, making sure the story is being told, and that you can tag in and tag out and discuss it and then go back in. So again, it's like finding that emotional hygiene around it, and finding ways to navigate those conversations. Yeah. But the real answer is make sure you're choosing the seasons wisely. And people are writing some crazy stuff. Right? People are writing some crazy stuff. And again, just because the playwright puts something on the page, it's your job as a theater practitioner, as a script analyzer, to say, what story are they actually telling? What is the story telling? And do I have to tell it this way? Am I qualified to know how to tell it this way? Are my actors consenting to tell it this way? Or is there another way to bring this across? Right. And so it's sort of, and even an intimacy director will do that. I'll do that too, of like, is this the most interesting? Oop, yeah, it is. Or, oh, no, it's not, So really, forcing yourself to, kind of think outside the box is also a really good practice. Go through some of your scripts, look, especially Shakespeare, look at those scenes, look at those, Midsummer, pull out some of those scenes, what's the most interesting way? Because the context, is this intimacy funny? Is it I promise there's some funny intimacy in Midsummer, right? Is this funny? Is this sensual? Is this scary? Right? And so getting really specific about the story that you're telling is going to be really helpful in, not meandering through, not making your actors try stuff, just trying stuff. If you as the director or you as the actor know what story you're telling, you're going to be way better off. Yeah. These are great questions. Other questions? Grant, I see you.
I'm just popping up because they are really, really great questions. And I thought about theater outside the box. And of course, we're finding ourselves within.
We are in the box.
But I wanted to also make sure you knew that you have time and you could proceed further. And so if there are other, areas you wanted to get into, or other questions that, the five of y'all had, please jump on into it, because the time is available to us here for a little while longer. So that was my excuse to pop on.
Cool. Yeah, Jordan.
Could you speak on, Sarah, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about when a boundary is crossed or someone's boundaries are violated, and how you navigate that if, say, that person, the trust is sort of broken between two scene partners, there's any of that, I would love to hear your thoughts on or experiences on.
Yeah, so that's, the short answer is every situation is going to be very different, right? The longer, more specific, I guess, to my experience answer is the sooner you have a conversation about it, the better. So finding out what boundary was crossed. So if the boundary was, don't touch the back of my neck, and then the person touches the back of their neck, like, you stop immediately. If the person realizes that they crossed a boundary, apologize immediately. I'm so sorry, I touched the back of your neck. That I just broke your boundary. I'm very sorry. Is there anything, we need to do to move forward, right? So that is, ideally that person takes, responsibility. If they don't, if it's more of like a systemic, like this person just can't be trusted, then it's a conversation between myself, the director, the producer, and it kind of goes up the chain of command, right? Again, the intimacy director is not there to, I hate using the word police, but we're not there to like police the room, but we are there. People know that we are watching them, that we are, so it discourages bad behavior. I'll say it that way. Having another person on the production team who is specifically looking out for boundaries, consent, and communication discourages people from breaking boundaries, because they know that everyone is on the same page. Is like, what is this room? What is this room? Is this okay? What's okay in this room? So they know that they will be held accountable. So there we go. So that's my definition of a safe space, is that there is accountability. So you are not judged on who you are, or what you're bringing in. You're judged on what you do. And if you do something that breaks a boundary or offends somebody, that there's accountability. So that accountability can be everything from a quick conversation and apology to a recast, right? There's a huge what is this? Cavern. Yeah, a huge canyon. But yeah, accountability, and just, and that people know they're going to be held accountable. A lot of the times it'll be like, oop, you know what? Let's take a break. It's literally like, oop, okay, you know what? Tag out, let's take a break. You check in with the person who you've seen has had the boundary broken, or Kevin, you asked of someone who seems to be going into some sort of trauma. You stop. We're playing make-believe. This isn't real, right? We want to remind our bodies that this isn't real, that you're safe, you're in a safe place. So we tag out, take a break, we get some water, and often we'll talk about it, but then we won't go back to doing that same scene. We'll move on and come back another day, right? And in those situations, if we need to come back another day, I will check in privately with that actor and say, hey, is there anything I can do to support you in choreographing the scene or moving through the scene? Are you comfortable trying this again tomorrow? What can I do to support you in moving through this process? So again, I'm not a therapist, but I am there to give someone tools and to sort of give, let them tell me what they need in order to feel like they can be in that room. And so when you have a production team that's on your side, we haven't really talked a lot about resistance, but if the producer is on your side, if the director is on your side, if your stage manager is on your side, it makes it much easier, because then you're not working against the team, right?
Thank you.
That's a good segue to a question that I just got in the chat, if I may, and it was this. And in my case, it has been budget, but we've come around to, saying, well, if it's important, you'll find the budget. That said, the biggest barriers that you encounter, Sarah, or that you've sort of seen others or companies encounter for getting intimacy directors involved with production, and how do you think that the creators can better facilitate their use?
Yeah, so just like you wouldn't do Romeo and Juliet without hiring a fight director, you got to plan your season to know who you're going to have to hire, right? And that's the new reality. So you need to, if you're doing Big, the musical Big, wow, where did that come from? If you're doing the musical Big, you're going to have to build a giant piano that people dance on, right? You just know. So you're going to have to get a scene designer, and you're going to have to get the budget from the lighting department to make sure that the keyboard lights up, right? And so that is the producer's job to like make sure they know in the script what the requirements are for how they, what are the requirements to do this show safely. Again, like, Allison just asked, ideally you have already done that. Season selection has already happened. What do we do? Now we need an intimacy director. You get someone for as much time as you can. So if you find you're getting over your head, if an actor, is doing the scene, if you're already into rehearsals and an actor comes and says, you know what, I really would feel more comfortable if you had an intimacy director here. Can you afford to bring someone in for an hour? Probably.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you see industry barriers still in the engagement of intimacy directors?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
TV, film, and theater?
Sure. Well, the good news is that more and more people are accepting that it is an invaluable part of the team. It's part of the production team. Again, it's another outside eye. It's another person there to help tell the story in the best way possible. So, to be quite honest, the resistance that I've come across has been like older generation actors who, I've been doing this for a long time and I didn't ever use an intimacy director. We always had to just kiss on stage. We just had to take our shirts off. And I'm like, that's great. I'm so glad. And my answer to that is I'm so glad that you are comfortable. And I hope that those situations were, that you consented to those situations. And I am here for as much or as little as you need me to make sure that we're all telling the same story. So I'm here for you, but I'm also here for your scene partner to make sure that they're comfortable. And I'm here to make sure the director is comfortable in telling the story as well. So reminding people that they are part of a team will often sort of like take away the resistance to it. And also, if you're getting with a director, reminding the director that you are there to uplift their vision. So I come in with ideas on how something can be done, but I always defer to what the director wants in that moment. I always ask, director, what is the context of this? What do you want the audience to feel in this moment, right? And if I can give suggestions on how to make it more exciting, more interesting, great. But if me and the director have different visions, I'm there to support the director's vision. And so reminding the director that I am there to support them and their actors often helps with that resistance as well. And the other resistance, again, is financial, and that's real, and that's totally real, especially with, these smaller theaters or companies that, blew their budget on the giant piano from Big, and they can't afford someone. Please find an hour of someone's time. Because, even finding an hour of someone's time the first day of rehearsal to give someone some tools on yes, no, but how to have these conversations, to be a resource, or an hour of triage during tech, we'd way rather come in at the beginning of rehearsal, because I've been in those tech triages and those are not fun. We've gotten through them, but they're not fun. So the answer to this question was different a year ago. And now the answer is more people know. So we know better, so we have to do better.
ID Work was a principal session at the most recent Shakespeare Theater Association conference, and it was incredibly well attended and well conducted. It was, I definitely am sensing that same shift as you described, different a year ago. Yeah. And should be interesting post-COVID. Other questions from the group, or if you have others that you're moving on to, Sarah. So I don't want to cut that.
I saw Jordan have an impulse.
I do have an impulse. I was wondering also, you could just talk a bit about being an intimacy director, as far as having to be a vessel to so many people all the time, carrying other people's traumas in these moments and supporting actors, being the voice for actors a lot of the time. How do you navigate all of that weight and carrying that as an intimacy director? Is there anything self-care wise, emotional hygiene wise that you do as an intimacy director?
Yes, I have an extensive closure practice that I do before I walk into a room and after I leave a room. So I don't have to get into like the details of exactly what I do because it's like weird and ritualistic, but I have a physical, aural that I hear, breath work that I have to do before and after I leave. I also like to put on my imaginary armor before I walk into a room. So I very literally step into the boots, pull up the chainmail, put on the breastplate, sheath the sword. I find ways to self-protect, right? Because I have to be there to hold a lot of space. And that's actually one of the things that I love about the job. I love holding that space. And it can be absolutely exhausting. So you have to have closure practice. And then one of the biggest closure practices that I do is I talk to other intimacy directors. I'll get my friend Gabby on the phone. I talk to Gabby all the time. I'll be like, oh my God, Gabby, this thing happened. So we all lean on each other a lot. And it's a small enough industry still that I don't want to sound like a jerk of like, I know a lot of people, but we all know each other. Yeah. Like all of us have trained with the same people. We all know the same people. So if someone doesn't have the spoons to talk to me after a really difficult rehearsal, I can talk to someone else, or I can go into my, private group that, type on my, face chat or whatever, I can say, hey, this thing happened. Does anyone have any feedback? Or, hey, I really need support around this. So the answer to your question is yes, it is holding a lot of space, but it's also remembering again and again and again, we are telling a story. This isn't real. So, tagging in with my actors, tagging out with my actors, tagging in with myself, it's just really important that separation. So that the whole, like, you got to feel everything for it to be real. I don't want my actors to fall in love with each other. I want it to look like they're in love with each other. And I will give you movement and eyes and breath to make it look like you were in love with that person. You don't have to feel a thing. I don't want you to feel a thing. I mean, I want you to feel glad that you're there, but I want you to be able to walk away. And that's something really important, especially when we're working with this, more sensitive material, is like we have to, and, as far as the rehearsal process goes, you can't work on intimacy all day. You cannot have a 5-hour intimacy rehearsal because you will fall in love with someone. If you're staring into someone's eyes for 5 hours like that and saying beautiful words, you're going to fall in love with them. So you got to have short intimacy rehearsals. You have to take it little bits at a time. Again, you have to, separate. And then, your job as an actor is to make sure that your character knows why they're doing it, right? It's not you, it's your character. What does Titania want? It's not what do you want? It's what is Titania trying to get here? So then you can walk away afterwards. Like, did Titania get what she wanted? I think she did. Great. And you can feel good for Titania, and then you can go home and have your juice and your hot bath and like go to bed. Titania stayed on stage, and you can visit her again tomorrow.
Not entirely sure Titania's consent was fully engaged throughout the entirety.
Titania did not. That is absolutely true. It's a very bad example of consent.
Consent is revocable and ongoing.
That's right. It was not informed and not revocable because she's under a spell. Anyway.
Actors and apprentices, thank you. Sarah Scanlon, thank you very, very much. This has been tremendous. This will be up for a year through July 1 of 2021. With your permission and ongoing consent. And it once it premieres, has that functionality available from shakespeare.nd.edu. Our series continues through the end of August. And we're looking at things that might continue beyond there. But again, I am very, very grateful for your time and that each of y'all were able to join as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully back on Notre Dame Shakespeare Festival stage very, very soon.
Indeed. Can we tag out?
Yeah, we can totally tag out.